Ackley, Hammer Steel Performance. So this video should appeal to anyone who's ever had their bike on a dyno and went ahead and got a graph that outlines your results. Because we're going to talk about old and new calibrations and why we see such a variance on dyno graphs if you had something that was done a few years ago to what you see now. I have a couple assistants that are going to help edit the video. Assistant number one, Bryson. Look up. There you go. There's my editor. My second editor is the Addie May. So, okay, those are my two editors. Anyways, we'll continue on. So, as I was saying before, we're going to cover what looks like with an old calibration on a dyno and what looks like a new calibration on the dyno, and why we see various different results if you had something that was done a few years ago versus something that you're seeing now. Now, the dyno that I use is a Dynamite by Land & Sea. It's been around for quite a few years up in New Hampshire. What's different than mine is I'm able to cycle back and forth between old and new calibrations. And I also can show a graph what it looked like under new calibration, and I can open that graph under the old calibration and sort of see them side by side of what those two calibrations look like. And this will sort of help explain why we're seeing so many comments now that take place where people say, hey, you got a big bore and your big bore, on a cross country should make 25, 127 horsepower on a cross country, and now we're seeing 118, 119 horsepower. Sometimes you see 125, 126 with a little bit of head work, stock valves, a little bit of porting. So why are those differences, and what happens often is people will say, hey, your big bore in your cross country, for example, only made 121 horsepower, something's wrong. And what I'm telling you is probably not. It's really the way the calibrations and the software are. And this, certainly impacts DynoJet when they upgrade to the new, I think Win 7 or Win 8 software, and it really lower the numbers down from what the results are. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on into comparing big bores, old and new calibration, a 106 with ported heads cross country with old and new calibrations, a boardwalk that had stage 1 exhaust and stock intake and a tune, old and new calibrations, a cross country tour with DR cams, air filter, timing wheel, and such, old and new calibrations. And we'll sort of see how those things look and why we're starting to see some lower numbers on some of the newer builds across the industry. So let's move on. Thank you. Okay, first up, what we have here is a 117 big bore. This was a 2017 Magnum that had a 117 big bore, cams, air filter, Maximus tune, so on and so forth. And so what you see under on the black line is the new calibration, and we're doing about 129 foot-pounds of torque and 121 horsepower. And then the gray line is the old calibration. That's that calibration there has 133 foot-pounds of torque and 125 horsepower. And so that's the difference between the old and new calibration on the software. So here we're seeing, about a 4 or 5 horsepower difference and about 5 foot-pounds of torque difference. So again, real quick, is that's just the difference between the old calibration, new calibration of software, and why we're seeing slightly lower numbers. Let's move on to the next comparison. Next up this is a cross-country tour with DR cams, Lloyd air filter, timing wheel, Power Commander 5, and I think this might be not sure the exhaust on it, but anyways. So here we go. Once again, under the old software, this bike produced about 120 foot-pounds of torque and about 114 horsepower. And then the same bike with the new calibration software is about 115 foot-pounds of torque and 110 horsepower. So there, once again, we're sort of seeing that difference between old and new software, and what does that look like on the graph per se. Moving on to the next one. This one here is a little bit different. So this one here was I think a 2015 cross country. It was a 106, had revolutionary performance, ported heads with 1.5 millimeter larger intake and exhaust valves, 472 cams, and a little bit of compression increase. And once again, voice filter, timing wheel, and such. This one here, under the old calibration, she was 124 foot-pounds of torque and 127 horsepower. And with the newer calibration, she's sitting somewhere around 121 foot-pounds of torque and 123, 24 horsepower. So again, old calibration versus new calibration produces the newer calibrations produce slightly lower results than the old calibrations do. All right, next one. Our final comparison is a 2014 Boardwalk. This had stage 1 exhaust on it, stock intake, and tuned with a power commander. And once again, under the old calibration, we'd see about 113 foot-pounds of torque and nearly 90 horsepower. And then when we use the newer calibration, we're down to about 109 foot-pounds of torque and about 86 horsepower. And once again, it's really a percentage of change. And so the more power you make, the higher the percentage is. And that's sort of what we see here. So let's go ahead and recap this. Again, as always, please stay to the end. I know a lot of people like to sound off after the dyno graphs, but please hang on to the end. As we close this thing out, again, the overall intent of this was to be able to show there is a difference on dyno results based off of old and new software. Again, this is valid for the DynoJet system. It's valid for the Dynamite system calibrations. I can't speak for Superflow, Axis, or Mustang dynos, as I don't have any experience with those. So really, the big thing is try to keep us all informed, so that we are fair. As the Victory brand has gone away, but you see a lot of people buying into it, and then there's people that are having work done, and so on and so forth. And we're just, we just want to make sure we're good ambassadors to the brand, and we're being honest and truthful. We don't have our biases that override good, factual, solid information. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep everyone informed on there, and hopefully this is of value to you. I would think that most people should understand. Hey, listen, if I had my bike dynoed under the old software, a while back, then my numbers may be higher than somebody's now, and the recommendation shouldn't be, hey, there's something wrong with your bike. The recommendation is, hey, your number's a little bit lower. It looks like they had the new Win 7, Win 8 software on their DynoJet, whereas mine was tuned with the old software. All right. Okay, hope you all enjoy it. Appreciate it. Thank you.